Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Katie Merrow, Vice President of Community Impact at the Charitable Foundation. And the webinar this afternoon will be an update for nonprofits in New Hampshire. We're delighted you all can be with us. The team here at the Foundation is on for the webinar today is myself, Simon Delekta, our Senior Program Officer for the Piscataqua region, and Melinda Mosier, Senior Program Officer for the Monadnock and Upper Valley region. In the webinar today, we have about 30 minutes of information that we're going to provide to you, and then have time for question and answers. We'll begin with a brief overview of the Foundation, a couple of things in contextual information. Then we'll move on to our grant programs and ways you can work with us. Then we're going to talk about recent findings of a grantee survey, our grantee perception report, and the feedback we heard from all of you. And finally ending with more Q&A. If you have questions as we go along, type them into the question tool on your webinar screen, and we'll take questions at the end of each section. If yours doesn't get addressed, it means we're holding it to the end, or we have some that are similar. So just know that we will, by the end of the webinar, answer any questions you all may have. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Simon Delekta to lead us through the webinar today. Go ahead, Simon.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to start off today with a poll. So last week, I celebrated my 1-year anniversary at the Charitable Foundation, and we're wondering how long you've been in your position. So on the screen, you'll see a poll with a few options: less than a year, 1 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, and more than 5 years. We're going to take a minute to gather your responses. And we see they're coming in, and over 75% of you had voted, so we're going to share the results with you. It looks like about half of the folks on the call have been in their position for more than 5 years. Great. So now we're going to get into New Hampshire Charitable Foundation 101. I know that a number of you are familiar with the Charitable Foundation. Sorry about that, everyone. And community foundations can be complex organizations. The New Hampshire Charitable Foundation was created by and for the people of New Hampshire. And we have a good number of stakeholders. That includes nonprofits like you, students, donors, professional advisors, and the myriad leaders of the state. One of the best ways to understand the Charitable Foundation is to look at the breakdown of financial assets. As you can see on the screen, there are about 1,700 funds at the Charitable Foundation, and each one has its own purpose. At the Foundation, we're charged with stewarding these dollars so that New Hampshire always has flexible and reliable source of philanthropic capital. Each one of these has its own specific purpose, and I'm going to touch on a few of them. Designated and agency funds, for example, they're created by nonprofits and donors with the specific purpose of supporting one nonprofit. Field of interest funds make up 16% of the assets, and those are meant for a specific purpose. That purpose can be broad, like to support the environment in the state of New Hampshire, or it could be specific, such as to support the purchase of equipment for children with brain injuries in the Monadnock region. Finally, you'll see that there are unrestricted funds, which have been entrusted to the Foundation so that we can decide when and where they'll do the most good. Now, this leads to how much money the Foundation makes in grants each year. You'll see that in 2014, we made about 3,300 grants and around 1,700 scholarship awards, totaling $32 million. Nearly 40% of this was through donor-advised funds. And we work with each donor in a different way. Many of them choose to work with the Charitable Foundation because they want access to the Foundation's expertise. We can advise them on projects that match their values and interests, and we can connect them directly to organizations. We also work with donors who have a pretty clear indication of where they want to give to, and they make those recommendations to the Foundation each year. We're going to talk a little bit more about donor-advised funds later in the webinar. I want to note that our most visible and well-known program, because it's open to all nonprofits, is the Community Grant Program. And that makes up about 8% of the Foundation's total grant making. We do have a few other application-based programs. Those include the Wellborn Ecology Fund, the Tillotson Program for Co-op County, and the New Hampshire Youth Expert Initiative. Those are captured in the other applications piece of pie. You'll see that we make lots of scholarships to people of all ages that demonstrate need and promise through our scholarship awards. And finally, there are initiatives, which are also captured in the other application piece of pie. This is where the Foundation has decided to go deep and contribute to some of the big problems facing our state. These grant-making programs are by invitation only. And Katie is going to talk for a minute about what that looks like.
Thanks, Simon. I want to speak briefly to the Foundation's newest initiative, New Hampshire Tomorrow. And this initiative is born out of a concern for well-being of New Hampshire's children and youth, combined with changes in recent changes in demographic trends in the state. For years, for decades really, New Hampshire's economy has been fueled by in-migration from other states and a significant baby boom population supporting a robust workforce. But these trends have shifted, and currently the state faces an aging baby boomer population, slower population growth, less in-migration, and a growing inequality of opportunity among our youth, which really challenge New Hampshire's economic and social well-being going forward. So the Foundation has made a commitment to invest in youth from cradle to career, working in these three strategic areas that you see on your screen. First, in early childhood development, we're working to increase quality and access to quality early learning experiences. Secondly, we will be continuing our work to prevent youth substance use, currently in year 3 of a 10-year initiative there, with an overall goal of decreasing youth alcohol use by 5% by 2017. And finally, the Foundation will be continuing our work in scholarship and pathways to the workforce, working very closely with the university and community college systems as well as New Hampshire employers to strengthen those pathways. Currently embracing the university system goal of increasing STEM graduates, as well as working toward a broader goal of increasing educational attainment among New Hampshire residents to 65% by the year 2025. All of this is working toward the Foundation's long-term goal that all young people in New Hampshire enter adulthood prepared to support their families, contribute to the workforce, and contribute to their communities. The Foundation will be investing $10 million each year in these three strategic areas, and those grants, as Simon noted, will be done by invitation as we have done in recent years. I would note that the Foundation will continue to support broad work with children and youth, as we always have. Many important programs beyond these areas that are supported through our donor-advised grant making, through our community grant programs, and other occasional support and programs like that. Simon?
Thanks, Katie. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the community grants program. But first, I'm going to ask you a question. Another poll for you. Have you applied for a grant from the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation in the last 3 years? We know that many of you maintain a relationship with the Charitable Foundation through our community grants program. This includes both express grants and our larger grant program, which we're going to start talking about in just a minute. So, now that many of you have voted, let's close and share the poll. And about 75% of you have applied for a Charitable Foundation grant in the last 3 years. That's great. So some of this will be familiar to you. And we do hope to present some new information to help you navigate the process easier this year. So first, what's the goal of the community grants program? Mainly, we want to be responsive to community needs. This program is a wide open door to the Charitable Foundation. We support intentionally broad areas of work that you are all doing across the state. Health and well-being, education, civic engagement, economy, environment, arts, and culture. And this is through the Express Grant Program and the project or operating grants. You can apply for multiple grants. However, you can only receive one grant from the Charitable Foundation per year through the Community Grants Program. So if you are awarded or were awarded earlier this year an Express grant, you will be unable this year to apply for a project or operating grant. Let me chat briefly about the Express grant applications. These are up to $5,000 for a specific project. It is not for operating support, but capacity building support that allows you to better position the organization to succeed is acceptable. There have been 3 deadlines in 2015. The final one is coming up on August 18th. They're supposed to be short and fast. They're 5 questions, 300 words or less in a budget. And while we recognize that it's not always possible, our goal is that organizations will be able to complete the application in 4 hours or less. That does not include time spent developing the program, but roughly we're hoping that when you're applying for an Express grant, it doesn't take you more than 4 hours. Our goal in being Express is to give you a response to that application in about 6 weeks. Let me briefly touch about the large grant program. These are for project or operating grants, $20,000 regionally, $25,000 statewide, and organizations can apply for up to 3 years of support. That could be a 3-year project, or that could be 3 years of operating support. As many of you know, applying is a 2-step process. There's the concept paper, which is open now and due on August 21st. The concept paper is intended to be a brief pitch, so what you want to do, how you plan to do it, and how much it's going to cost. The concept papers are reviewed by Foundation staff, and the most competitive are invited for a full application. Again, we look to the concept paper phase as an open door for broad access to all requests. Ideally, this also reduces the burden on organizations so that not everyone has to go and complete a full application if it's not going to be invited past the concept paper stage. Those that are invited, those are reviewed by the grant committee of our regional advisory board, and the ultimate decision is made by our regional advisory boards with the support of staff. So those are the details. I know most of you know that information, but I'm going to focus a little bit on what we look for in an application. For operating support grants, I'm going to talk about these first. There are 3 things that we require. A board-approved strategic plan. If you're applying for a multi-year grant, the strategic plan must cover every year of the number of years that you're applying for. We look for certification that 100% of your organization's board makes a financial contribution to your organization. And we look for audited or reviewed financial statements. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why we do that in a minute. So let's review what we look for in an operating grant. You'll see the general buckets up on the screen, and I'm going to focus on 3 of them. The first, strategic direction. So what does a good application look like that talks about strategic direction? We want to understand how you think and prioritize goals. That's why we ask for a copy of your strategic plan. Now, a good application will talk about how operating support from the Charitable Foundation will allow you to meet those goals, and not only that, but what success looks like. The second point I want to focus on is self-assessment. Again, these are for operating grants. A good application for operating support details the process that you use for self-assessment, how those results guide your organization, either the management or how you look to improve your programming, and also provide some examples. Finally, I want to highlight for a third item, financial strength. We understand, unfortunately, that we can't support every organization every year. However, a good application details why now is a critical year for support, as opposed to the important work that you do on an ongoing basis. We want to understand how the support in 1 year for operating will allow you to better succeed, whether it's leveraging funds or allowing you to take advantage of a special opportunity in time. I also want to mention on financial strength why we request or require audited financial or reviewed financials. This is a question that we get sometimes. And I want to just state that general operating grants are our most trusting type of grants. Those funds can be used for anything that the organization decides. The Charitable Foundation, as a steward of the funds that we have, are responsible to ensure that they are used in a good way. An external review through financial reviewed statements by an external party or an audit is an important external piece that allows us to see that somebody in addition to us in the organization has taken a look. We recognize that an audit is not necessarily appropriate for all organizations, especially small ones, and that's why the project support grants are open to all. I'm going to talk for a minute about project grant considerations. Again, you'll see the bucket of considerations up on the screen. I'm going to highlight 3 and what we look for in a good application. The first I want to talk about is actually need. So I think that in many cases, and in some cases understandably, it may be assumed that the need is obvious and we should understand why support is important. But I want to explain that it's important to describe some evidence or assessments that point to community or organizational need. We look for this. If it's a reoccurring need, which many problems facing society are, we look for why foundation support is appropriate and necessary at this juncture in time. So don't forget to talk about that need portion. I understand that it's not directly related to what you're going to be doing, but it is an important part in our consideration. The second thing I want to highlight is the work plan, which is required for a project grant. The things that we look for inclusion in a work plan are activities, outcomes, a clear timeline, and who in the organization is responsible for each activity. We understand that it's a balance between providing a great deal of specifics and a general time frame, and we look for a balance between the two. It's also really important that the work plan is aligned with the budget that you submit. We compare these documents to make sure they line up with each other, and I would encourage you to take a look at them together before submitting your grant. Finally, I want to highlight sustainability. Mainly, how will the project continue without Charitable Foundation support in the future? We want to see a plan that's reasonably likely to succeed, because same with operating, we don't have the resources to provide support ongoing to projects every year. So these are some elements that we hope help you in navigating the concept paper process, and we hope these highlights have been helpful. One quick reminder before we pause to look at questions is that if you are a current or past grant recipient, remember, you must file a report before you apply again. So if you received a grant in 2014, for example, and that grant is ongoing, before you submit your application, you need to submit an interim report. That information on how to submit and a template are up on the Foundation's website. Similarly, if you've received a past grant and you've spent all the funds, a final report is required. You'll see in a little bit when we talk about reasons for application declines last year, one of the top reasons was organizations failing to submit a required report. So don't forget. So at this point, we've had some questions come in, and we want to be responsive to those. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Melinda.
Hello, and thank you, Simon. So we have been trying to respond to people individually, but have seen some themes, so just wanted to make sure that these questions were covered for the entire group. One of our common questions has been around the 1 per year community grant award, and that year is not based upon a fiscal year or a calendar year. It's typically the year associated with the grant period. So if you get a grant in August, then your grant period is through the next August. And that is how it works, not with the calendar or fiscal year. It's the 12-month grant period from the date of the award. One of the other questions that we've been getting is around multi-year grants. So if you're applying for a multi-year grant, it's $20,000 per year, not $20,000 total. And both project and operating requests can be multi-year requests. Sorry, we're just looking at the questions coming in. They're fast and furious right now. So one of the other questions for current grant recipients, because the application for the community grants is due prior to the end of your grant period, if you had a grant last year, the question is about reporting. And so ideally, the work would have been completed and you can submit a final report. If not, you may submit an interim report, but one of those 2 reports must be on file when you apply again. Another question about our multi-year grants is if you have a multi-year grant, do you have to reapply each year? The idea behind a multi-year grant is to both save energy and time. It does not require reapplication. However, it does require an updated report on the progress of your grant period, of your grant administration prior to releasing the subsequent year payment. We have a great question about donor-advised fund grants and whether those count towards your once-a-year grant requirement. If you have a donor-advised fund grant you did not apply for it, it's not part of the community grants process, that does not count against the 1 grant per year requirement. So you're more than welcome to apply for the community grants process if you qualify and think that you've got a good idea that you'd like to put forward. Oh, we have a question out there about whether the question says whether an operating grant could be used for a small organization to get their first financial review to then be in a position where they would qualify. We have what we've done is it wouldn't be an operating grant, it would be a project and likely of the express grant scale. As long as the applications have been successful in the past in that way, have been able to demonstrate that they will be planning for covering that cost themselves in the future, and they have a way to sustain that process because it's not a one-time review. It's part of your organizational process and development in regards to how you look at your financials on an annual basis. So yes, and we need to be assured that if we're going to make that investment, that the organization has the capacity and the willingness to continue the practice within their own budget.
And I just add, I want to stress again, we understand that audits are expensive. They are not cheap things for an organization to do, and they're not right for everyone either. So make sure, have a conversation about it with your board. If you have a finance or audit committee of your board, if not the whole board, it's something to consider, but it's not always right. So I just want to stress that.
A couple of other questions first. We've had some audio questions and some people who have been able to resolve that on their own. People are finding better luck using the call-in option rather than the audio microphone on your computer or laptop. So if you're having any audio problems, that might be a solution for you. One of the other questions that we've gotten, people were asking, will these slides be available after the presentation? And we will be posting this, we're recording this, and we'll be posting it on our YouTube page, so it will be available to you or colleagues moving forward. So one of our questions, and for those who have reviewed our eligibility criteria on our website, of the things that we fund, capital campaigns is often a question. While through our community grants process we don't fund capital campaigns, the question has come up of, do we fund campaign council or other things to support that? We do consider those capacity building activities, so we would consider potentially supporting applications that are to provide campaign council, fundraising services, that sort of thing, but not the campaign itself.
And the same is actually true for academic research for the most part. Academic research is not something we support through the community grants program. So I'm going to move on. We'll keep on taking questions. We'll pause again in a little bit. We left off after I gave you some information about the grant programs and things to highlight in your application. And we want to put that into some context for you because we often hear from organizations that they want to better understand the community grant program. Our goal really is to be as transparent as possible, and we're hoping to be a little more transparent with you today. At the end of the webinar, we're going to talk a little bit about our efforts to do that going forward. So you'll see on the screen results from 2014. And a couple things to note. A few data points. The first, before I get this up on the screen, the first is that Express Grant applications have been funded at 50% of the applications have been funded for the last 3 years in a row. So that's the data point about Express Grants. About 50% for 2014, 2013, and 2012. On the concept papers, which are detailed on your screen, you'll see that, and I've got the numbers, so I can do them for you, but concept papers, about 77% of them were accepted to or invited to apply for a full application, and about 78% of the full applications were awarded grants. So when we started the concept paper phase, of the 182 concept papers we received, 58% of them received an award. I also want to note that that rate of 58% is exactly the same when we split them out, project versus operating. So in 2014, we had about 40 more project applications overall than operating. Both were funded at 58%. Next, I know many of you are out there in different areas of the state, and y'all see here that the award percentages for regions varies from a low of 47 to a high of 78. These numbers obviously vary each year based on the dollars available, which does change every year, on the number of quality applications received, and also on whether or not any of the applications received fit some of the restricted use funds that we have access to for the community grants program. A note of how it relates to this year, in 2015, for organizations working statewide, we anticipate a more competitive process as we increase our focus on the well-being of children and youth through the invitation-only New Hampshire Tomorrow initiative that Katie described earlier. Finally, in 2014, we awarded a little over $2 million through the large community grants program. About $1.73 million was requested and we were not able to fund. And this actually doesn't include Express Grants. While those grants are only $5,000, we receive a number of applications that aren't included in here. But you'll see that sometimes it simply comes down to the need is much greater than the resources that we have, and it does come to hard decisions. So I encourage you to think about some of the ways that you can make your application stronger. And I touched on a few key points a little bit earlier. So 2014, we keep track of the reason that concept papers were declined. And here are the top 5 from last year. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what each one means. A weak concept paper was the #1 reason for a decline. And that means generally that it lacks details. But it, in many cases, was missing a key element that we look at in those criteria that was in this PowerPoint a little bit earlier. So that includes missing a means to evaluate impact, lacking a sustainability plan, or in the case of operating grants, lacking a clear explanation of why funding is critical in this moment in time, as opposed to the important work you're doing every year. Number 2 is misaligned requests, and Melinda touched on this a little bit. We do sometimes get requests for capital campaigns or supporting academic research, and those are not supported through the community grants program. This is also an area where sometimes we understand there is a fine line between a project and operating support. Project support is restricted specifically to the uses that are described in the proposal and cannot, even for a short temporary time, be used for any other purpose. So, with that clear definition, there are times when project proposals are too close to operating support, and that falls into that misaligned request. The third reason, low community need. So one of the things that we look for is serving underserved populations, and we look for that, and sometimes that isn't fully reflected in a project. This also includes duplication of service. We recognize that there are big needs in the state, lots of organizations out there focused on them, and in many cases, some of you are doing the same work as others. We look for collaboration. We look to see best practices, and we want to make sure that there's no duplication of service. We also want to make sure in this low community need bucket how the proposal will have a positive impact on the community. And it's important to talk about how if a project succeeds, what the benefits of that will be and how you will know that those benefits exist. And that includes another reason for a decline. The fourth is missing report. Touched on that. Hope that reminder is seared in your brain. Don't forget to submit the report if you have an active or completed grant. Finally is finances. There is the fifth most common reason for a concept paper decline. That could be an organization submitted an application and did not have audited or reviewed financials. It also could be that the organization is running an operating deficit. If an organization is running an operating deficit, we do not provide general operating support that year. This, I hope that this information has been helpful to give you a sense of why concept papers were declined last year. I also want to stress one thing. As a program officer, I, and Melinda here next to me, we are here as a resource for you. And whenever we send out award or decline notifications, we are available to go through the reasons that it was declined with you. Feel free to reach out after a decline to have a conversation with the program officer and get some feedback. It may take a little bit of time because all the notifications go out at once, and sometimes there are a lot of requests at once, but we will get back to you, and we are happy to have that conversation with you so that you can improve your applications in future years. We're going to pause here, excuse me, pause here again. Melinda?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have some more questions coming in, and wanted to, for some of the most common ones, respond to the group in case others are wondering this. So one of the questions has been, okay, is there a specific reporting form? I'm a previous grantee. I need to get that taken care of. There is a specific reporting form. It's on our website under the Grant Seekers section of the website. If you click on that, in the left-hand bar, there's an option for grant reports and change requests. So that's where you're going to find your forms that you need to complete the grant report and how to submit it. And also, we had a question about an extension to the grant. They need more time to complete it. If there's anything that is a change request, which would be the time, what the project is, any budgetary changes over $500 from your original request, you would also, on that same page, grant reports and change requests, find a form to fill that information out and submit it and be considered for a change request. So that's how you find that resource. There are some questions about deadlines and notification if you are applying for a larger grant, and we'll talk about those a little bit further down.
So I'll even mention them right now. So the concept paper, if you submit a concept paper, you will be notified on September 11th whether or not you've been invited to submit a full application. If you have been invited, the deadline for the full application is October 2nd.
Great, thank you. We have a question that I know I've heard from many times in the community, and the question is around fiscal sponsorship. So very often an organization will act as a fiscal sponsor for a new nonprofit or a community coalition, those types of efforts. The fiscal sponsor is allowed to submit its own application as well as acting as a fiscal sponsor for another applicant. So acting as a fiscal sponsor does not preclude you from applying to the community grants process.
Great. Okay, we're going to keep on taking questions, but I'm going to give a question that we get a lot, which is how do I, when I say I mean an organization like you, get in front of Charitable Foundation donors? There's Brad and Sue Wyman. They are Charitable Foundation, they are part of the Charitable Foundation's donor community. And as I mentioned earlier, we work with members of our donor community in different ways. Some of them we work with closely on a regular basis, some we have a lighter touch with. So, how do you get in front of them? The first is Grant Source. For those of you that have applied for a grant before, this is the online grant management system that the Charitable Foundation uses, and we also use it with our donors. So, for example, if we work with a donor in the North Country, and that donor comes to us and says, we'd love to make a grant to an environmental group somewhere in the state, can you give us a sense of how many organizations there are working in this field? Our first stop is to go to Grant Source. Therefore, it's really important that you keep it up to date. That includes the list of materials that we require. There's also a place for an organizational description. Take a look at your profile, once a year at least, and be sure that the information we've got in there is up to date. We're also always working to connect nonprofit organizations with our donors. We're piloting something new this year to try and increase the number of opportunities you have to be in front of our donor community for those that are looking for it. This new thing is called Greater Giving. You'll see a screenshot of the homepage up on the screen. It's a password-protected site open only to Charitable Foundation donors, and it is used to highlight projects around the state. So, as you can see on this next slide as an example, it shows you, or it shows the donors who are interested in going and looking for something to give to. It gives them the project that's being worked on, picture and logo, shows a little campaign bar of how much money is left to support the project. So donors don't need to give to it all at once. They could each make up different portions of it. And you'll see that Give Through MineHCF is a big orange button. They can make a donation to this project with the click of a button. In its pilot year, the organizations that are currently up on Greater Giving have been selected based on the interest areas of donors who we know are interested in working with us through this way. Another note is that community grants, the express grants, and the large applications that you'll be submitting, you may have noticed over the last few months there's a new tab to complete called Donor Story. Those are the ones that are selected for funding go up on this site so that we can fund as many as possible. It's really important when you're submitting an application, if you want to be highlighted on the Greater Giving site, that you complete that donor story information. We're going to be talking about a little bit of a training about telling the donor story that we'll be doing in the winter. But up until now, I want to say that that donor story, consider it talking to your neighbor or somebody you don't know. It's not the typical grant application speak that is required in the concept paper or application phase. So we need a photo, we need a logo, we need that great description, and submitting a community grant is a way to get up there. Also, we look for organizations that match donor interest through GrantSource. I'm just going to go back to GrantSource one more time. Make sure that you keep your GrantSource profile updated. With that, Melinda's got a number of more questions. We're going to do one final poll, and that poll is, what is the size of your organization's operating budget? Just to get a sense of, if you're still paying attention, we know everyone is, more so to get a sense of what type of organizations are on the call. Results are trickling in, and we're going to close this and share it in a minute, and Melinda's going to address some additional questions. We got 75% have voted, so here are the results. It looks like the majority of organizations, a third of you, have an operating budget between 100 and $500,000, and there's a scattering with the rest of about 15 to 20%. That's great to see. So thank you, small and large organizations, for joining us today. Melinda?
Great. So the questions continue to come in fast and furiously. We're going to try to answer all that we can. If we don't get to your question today, we are committed to getting back to you with an answer either way, whether it was a question submitted prior to the broadcast or during the broadcast here today. So we have lots of questions about the grant reports, the timing of the grant reports, and concept papers. You do have to have a grant report submitted prior to the submission of the concept paper. It's not prior to the submission of an application if invited. So that is one of the criteria we look at when we're considering concept papers. If you don't have a report on file, that would make you ineligible to be invited for a grant. So that's and again, we just talked about where that's available on our website. If you are still, the work isn't done yet, you still need a few more months in your grant period to complete that work. It is okay. There's the option on the report to either say that it's a final or select interim. It's all on the same reporting form. So you would, in that case, select interim if the work is still going on and you haven't completed the grant, but yet you need to update the foundation on where things stand prior to this new application.
Sorry. And there's, let me just quickly highlight the reason that we asked for interim reports. One of the things that we take into consideration when looking at applications is past work. That doesn't mean that the project that received funding from the Charitable Foundation had to be a giant success. It just means that we look to see your progress made toward it, what your results are, and how you're going to use those results in the future, because that's information for us that we take in consideration when looking at future applications to better understand how the funds have been used in the past and how they might be used in the future.
Great. One of the questions we have around operating grants specifically, a couple have come in saying, so if we have a deficit, are we not eligible for an operating grant? If you meet the criteria for an operating grant, you are eligible. However, in the review process, it won't be the strongest application if you are operating on a deficit. So that will be taken into consideration. I also always encourage grantees when they're submitting budgets and that information, use your footnotes to explain things that you think that a reviewer would need to know about your application and your financial situation. Footnotes are very helpful for folks. Another question we have is, it sounds like we do, most of our funding is in human services and working with underprivileged, low-income populations. As Simon said at the beginning of the, at the top of the presentation, is we fund in our community grants program everything from arts and culture to social services and across the spectrum. So each region does try to keep a balance in context of the resources they have available and the community's needs, but it's also based upon everything that you have in the docket on in any given grant cycle. But we absolutely, whether it's the environment, civic engagement, those sorts of things, we do fund through our community grants and throughout the foundation all different types of organizations. It's not just human services and social services.
Great.
One of our popular questions that we're going to have to get back to you on is if we can share examples of successful applications with you. We will need to have permission from the nonprofits who have submitted those in order to be able to share them. So we're going to work on that as a resource for our nonprofit partners and potential grantees, and get back to you on whether that will be possible.
All right, we've got about 15 minutes left, and one more big area to talk about. And that is a grantee perception report that the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation just received from the Center for Effective Philanthropy. So in 2004, 2008, and again this year, we engaged the Center for Effective Philanthropy, which is the leading organization that does this sort of work, to conduct an anonymous survey of grantees. If you were one of those grantees, thank you, thank you, thank you. We really appreciate you taking the time. We know the survey was long, but it helps us evaluate our work. The survey results are, again, totally anonymous, and we compare them to our peers, other community foundations and other funders in the state, and also our previous results. So the Center for Effective Philanthropy works with us. They provide some best practices that we could look at. And, you know, one of the ways, as an example, in 2008, one of the things that we did based on the results from the grantee perception report was we added the option of applying for a multi-year grant, and we shortened the application process. So again, thank you if you helped us. We want to share a little bit about this. There's going to be more to come. Organizations, we are going to be releasing the grantee perception report to organizations, so you can take a look through the whole thing if you're interested, and that'll be coming out to everyone the next week. But let me share some highlights. So on the screen, you'll see that we have improved in the time of submission between getting your application in and when you get a clear funding commitment from the Charitable Foundation. That's something that we've been working on since 2008, and something that we hope that we know is responding to your needs. A couple other things that improved significantly between 2008 and our most recent perception report were threefold: our perceived impact on grantees' local communities, our understanding of grantee organization strategy and goals, and our effects on public policy. I want to say that at the Charitable Foundation, we are always striving to improve the way that we work, and this gives us some data to do that. I also want to say that there are some areas where we need to continue to work to improve, and we're going to be instituting some changes over the next few months, and we want to give you a highlight of what those are in response to the information that you've given us. The first, we're going to share more info about application-based grant making. That started today, and we will continue to do so every year so that you get a sense of acceptance rate, number of grants, etc. That will be done through the website. We also are going to work on improving our reporting process. Mainly that comes down to two things. In the future, starting now, we are going to be giving individualized responses to every final grant report that is submitted to the Charitable Foundation. We recognize that you put a great deal of effort and time into completing your project and completing the report, and it's important for us to give you some feedback when you take the time to submit it. The other thing we're doing is we're actually going to be holding a pilot in the fall in Piscataqua. My colleague Yulia Spanchek, who's our community knowledge officer, and we're going to be leading a pilot that is an in-person grantee reporting meeting. It's going to be a short workshop, and it's going to be in place of a written grant, and we're going to be evaluating how that goes in the Piscataqua region. So if you're out there in the Piscataqua region and you had a project grant in 2014, you'll be hearing from me about this optional pilot. The other thing we're going to be doing in early 2016 is host regional gatherings. You'll have an opportunity to learn from your program officer about grant opportunities for the year ahead. As I mentioned, we're also going to have input from our communications team on best practices in telling a donor story. And most importantly, it gives us an opportunity, and you an opportunity, to connect with each other. Finally, I want to note that our Express Grant program is something that we are taking a close look at. Over the coming months, we are evaluating how we've done in that program and the feedback that we received through our survey. And there are possible changes that we will relate to you as soon as we have that information for the 2016 grant year. So we've spent a lot of time giving you a lot of information. We've been answering questions as we go, and we know that there are more coming in. I want to highlight what Melinda said, which is if you did ask a question either beforehand or you're asking one now that doesn't get answered, we will be back in touch with you with an answer individually over the next week.
Great. Thank you, Simon. And we are definitely going to have to follow up with a few of you because it's specific information that we would need to help ensure that you have a clear answer to your question. Some of the other questions that we have been getting in regard that are pretty common across the board is folks are asking how do they log into GrantSource? Where do they find that resource for building their organizational profile and beginning the application process? On our website, nhcf.org, in the header section, there's a button that says Login. When you click that button, there's an option for GrantSource. And it will bring you to the GrantSource page. If you need to build a profile or request login information, it will allow you to do that. If you forgot your password, it'll help you with that too. So if you go just to our main website and click the Login button in the header, it will bring you to the page that gets you to GrantSource.
We're going to give you some contact information in a minute too for first line of defense for any questions. Program officers are also only available, and I'm actually going to switch to the last slide even though we're not ending just yet. You'll see questions about GrantSource, questions about the application process. The first point of contact is Wendy Cahill. Wendy's contact information is up there on the screen. You can find her on the website, and feel free to reach out to her directly. I know that many of you also have a relationship with your program officers, and you can ask them too, but for questions about GrantSource and basic application questions, Wendy's the first stop.
Absolutely, and that was actually one of the questions that we have now is how do I connect with my SPO, or what if I have questions, how do I get assistance and resources? So as Simon had said, Wendy Cahill is a fabulous resource. She's the one who can provide the technical support on GrantSource. She's well-versed in all of our frequently asked questions and can give you a lot of good information. And she's readily available. So when she gets to a point where it's a substantive question that she doesn't want to quite speak for the program officer that's going to give you advice, she'll absolutely either make the appointment for you and or connect you with the appropriate senior program officer to give you guidance on your concept paper or application. Another question we had actually prior to is, are there proposal writers available to advise nonprofit organizations on the fundamentals of grant writing? In this case, we would encourage people to visit one of our partner organizations that we have supported, the New Hampshire Center for Nonprofits, that has a wonderful suite of resources available to organizations, and there are things specifically on grant writing and the fundamentals of grant writing. So that's something that you all should think about in terms of a resource. They have a great online platform called Nonprofit Next that membership allows you access to, that gives a suite of things from governance and HR and fundraising and marketing and across the spectrum.
How to develop a fundraising campaign, strategy documents.
Absolutely, it is, and it's a great, for me, I've used it even with some organizations. They provide templates where it's a lot of just copying and pasting and just inserting your information, and it's all been vetted for New Hampshire nonprofits to ensure that it meets our standards and criteria and laws. So fabulous resources. If you haven't been there, please go check it out. And we are getting close. Let me just look to see if there's any last questions that we can answer. And if we haven't answered your question, we will get back to you individually. It looks like we're winding down on the questions. And so, Simon, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. So this webinar is going to be archived on the Charitable Foundation's YouTube channel. You'll be able to find it up there. And we're also going to be sending out a survey of this webinar to get your feedback. We've provided a lot of information at you, and I know that you've probably been furiously handwriting or typing, and we hope that this information that we've provided has been helpful to you as you think not only about the application process, but to give you a better sense of what we're looking at and what we're thinking about here at the Charitable Foundation.
Great. Well, I want to thank everyone for being with us today, and Melinda and Simon, thank you for the work today. And please keep the feedback and questions coming. Let us know how we can serve you. The Charitable Foundation, we work through you, our nonprofit partners, and our goal is to support you in the important work you do in the community. So thank you all for what you do and for working with us, and we look forward to talking with you soon.
Thanks, everyone.